Hi, welcome to the Second Line Show. I'm Nola Nash. Let's let the good times roll. Hi, once again, welcome. I am Nola Nash. Welcome to the Second Line Show. We have got a great show for you guys today. I do want to go ahead and remind you to start leaving those comments in the comments section. If you've not given StreamYard permission to use your Facebook profile, then go ahead and drop your name into your comment so that we can see who's here, who's joining us, and address you by name. We will get to as many of those comments as we can. If we don't have a chance to get to your comment during the show, no worries. We do tend to go back to those comments and catch up with you guys after the show. And also, if you are watching us in a replay, go ahead and put those comments down in the comment section as well. We do go back. I get notifications when those comments come in, and at least I go back to check, and I know our authors tend to go back as well. So go ahead and start doing that while I let our fabulous authors introduce themselves to you. We've got a great group today. Go ahead and take that off there so you can see all their fabulous faces. And we are going to go Brady Bunch style. So we're going to start with AC Burch over here. And here is your question. I want you to tell me a little bit about yourself, what you write, and your question is, what is your favorite, or who is your favorite opposite gender literary character? Okay. So guys, you're picking girls, girls, you're picking guys. Favorite literary character of the opposite gender. Go for it, AC.
Oh, hi. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm delighted to be with you all. I started out as a musician and trained as a classical performer and got into writing kind of late in life. I write LGBT fiction, and I've also written a book of short stories, tending to focus on two major themes. The first being what Armistead Maupin called the logical family, meaning the family that we create for ourselves as opposed to the family that we are born into. And I also really like dealing with what I call the unlikely hero. So I try to, especially in the book of short stories, talk about people that are faced with major dilemmas and turning points in their lives, and sort of unexpectedly, and what they do to kind of get through that. And hands down, my absolute favorite character in book, as well as in movie, from as early as I can remember, is Auntie Mame.
I love Auntie Mame.
Yeah, what's not to love?
I know. I did Little Theater growing up, and our local Little Theater did one of the best productions of Auntie Mame I have ever seen. My mom was in it. It was just so much fun. I love that. Love that. Auntie Mame is fantastic. All right, so we have for us now Tim Logan. Tell us a little bit about yourself, sir. Thank you so much for staying up so late. You are across the pond from us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. My name's Tim. I'm in Nottingham in the UK, and I was a journalist, sort of earlier in life, and wrote for national newspapers in London, and then also here in Nottingham. Subsequent to that, I worked for universities, and while I was doing that, spent about 10 years kind of trying to write my first book and trying to sort of make a breakthrough into publishing and get an agent and those things. And that sort of finally happened for me in 2017 when my first book came out. That was called Lies. And I've had 3 more since then, which have been published. There's actually 4 in the UK and 3 in the US at the moment. The most recent one in the USA was called The Vacation. I write psychological thrillers, mostly kind of based on family situations and quite familiar situations. And my UK publisher likes to the line they use for my books is the kind of I write about things that it could be you kind of thing. It could be you in that situation. That's the sort of the way they like to try and frame my stories. So The Vacation was the most recent one in the USA, and in the UK just last year I had a book called The Catch, which came out, and I've got another one coming in March, and I'm writing the one after that for next year. So it's it's all go. And my favorite characters, are kind of, these questions sort of put me into a bit of a tailspin, because normally I like to have about 2 or 3 hours to think about these things. But,
it's on this button. Knee-jerk reaction. You got to go with your gut.
so I'm gonna cheat, because two of them kind of just sort of came to me.
Okay.
I'm gonna say Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs would be my hero, and if I can have an anti-hero as well,
Yes.
I'd like to have Annie Wilkes from Misery.
Oh,
Both of those.
excellent.
Well, that shows you something about what's going on in my head, which is
Yes, psychological
Very,
power.
very
She's going
telling.
real strong right there. I love that. All right, so we're going to continue our Brady Bunch kind of tour around the square here. So we're going to go down to Gregory. We're going to save our ladies for last. Normally we would do ladies first, but we're going to save our ladies for last. Mostly because my good friend Jen Hugo, hello. Y'all, this is all the wine I've had. I swear. It's not wine that my mouth not work. I would love to blame it on that. It's not. Lynne. She's returning to this show. So we are going to turn things over right now to Mr. Gregory Phillips. And Gregory, you and I met during the Pulpwood Queens weekend. And so I'm so glad to see you again. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. This is fun. And I'm on the West Coast, so kind of the opposite of Tim. It's only 3 o'clock where I am, so I'm not having wine yet. I'll have to go back to work after this. So I write sort of literary book club fiction. I've had 2 novels published so far, and my 3rd novel is coming out this spring, and I'm very excited about it. I think that I'm going to have the cover reveal probably as soon as tomorrow. So I'm going to put my Facebook page in the chat, and if you want to go ahead and follow me there, you'll see the details on the new book. It's called A Season in Lights, and it's a story of passion, ambition, and escape set in the colorful artistic underworld off Broadway in New York City. It's coming out through Lucid House Press, and a couple months away. And the question of favorite characters, I get asked that, or favorite books, and I give a different answer every time. So I'm just going to give you the first great female character that popped into my head today from a novel I love is Nicole Diver from F. Scott Fitzgerald's Tender as the Night.
Excellent choice. Excellent choice. Very nice. And Greg, I was looking for your cover for your new book to put on the final slide today, and I couldn't find it. So now I know why I couldn't find it and when it's going to be hopefully revealed. So guys, make sure you are following Gregory and check that out, because I was dying to see it. So I know I will be checking it out. All right, we're going to go over to Donna. Go for it, Miss Donna.
Well, I'm kind of laughing at myself. Like, I made the assumption that everybody would know my last name, and I just put Donna. And then I got in here, and it's like everybody has their last name. I'm like, oh, oops.
Everhart is joining us today.
That's right, Donna Everhart.
Like Madonna, we just know your share.
That's right. That's what I was going to say. You don't need it. It's just
I'd like to think that way, but so in case you can't tell, the longer I talk, you'll know I'm Southern. Born and raised in Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been living here most of my life, except for 2 years when I was in Michigan for 3rd and 4th grade. I was an IT person for like 30 years and did a lot of different things with a company called Nortel. I don't know if anybody knows Nortel. It seems like every time I talk about Nortel, somebody knows Nortel. So I started there, and I was there actually for 25 of that 30 years. And actually, if they had not gone bankrupt, I sometimes wonder, would I be doing what I'm doing now? Because that was sort of the impetus that got me into writing. I'd always had it at the back of my mind that I was gonna write something sometime, one day maybe. And I had had this manuscript on my desktop for like, I don't know, 5-10 years maybe. And it was about 85 pages. And when they went bankrupt, I actually went back to school And I was still working because even though they went bankrupt, they didn't go out of business right away. It took them about 3 to 4 years to close down and sell off all their assets. And I stayed on. As long as they would have me, I was going to stay on. And long story short, somewhere towards the end of my tenure there, I found out what my end date was. And I had been working on, over my shoulder there, the education of Dixie Dupree. And so I left the company in 2012, and the book was finished, and it didn't sell right away. It took like 3 years. But ever since then, that's what I've been doing. And I've got 4 books out now, with the 5th one coming out in February of 2022. And what I like to write is, probably no surprise, Southern fiction, but it's also considered historic fiction because it's usually like 50 years ago or more. And my bio says that and so this is the easiest way for me to tell you what I write, aside from it being Southern fiction. It's about family hardship and troubled times in a bygone South. So most of my stories are going to take place anywhere before 1970, and that's where they've all been so far.
I love that time period, first of all. What a great time period to work with. And I'm so glad that they went bankrupt so that we have your novels in the
Exactly.
world. I
am too, because I'm such a chicken, you know. I probably wouldn't have had the nerve to say, I'm quitting my job, you know, go off the road, you know.
That would be a really hard thing to do. So great job, Norton. Right. So now, who's your favorite male literary character?
Well, I'm sort of like the guys here in that I need more time to think about this, but one did come to my mind, and so I'm kind of cheating here a little bit because if I were given maybe like a day or so, I could come up with a lot more. But there's a character that I actually just finished this book, and his name is Sal, and he's actually, you go through the book thinking he's the devil. So Sal is a short version of Satan and Lucifer. Oh. And it's from this book. I have to have it right here. It's The Summer That Melted Everything by Tiffany Mcdaniel. And yeah, fantastic book. And actually she got a blurb from one of my favorite Southern writers, Robert Morgan.
Oh,
So,
okay, yeah.
Yeah, nice, very nice, excellent choice. And it's so hard to choose a character. I mean, don't you tend to gravitate to the ones that are like the book you just finished? Because we all love characters, we all love readers. You know, we all love writers and readers, and we're all of these things. And so we want that last character that's kind of simmering in our brain. It's very difficult to think back to all the things that we've read. So it's a tough question. I know that's a tough question, and that's kind of why I put you on the spot with it. I could have given you time to think about it. I knew what that question was going to be, but I decided to go with the gut reaction. All right, so Lynne, take us on home.
Okay, so well, Donna, if we're talking about blurbs, I got a blurb. Great, Donna Everhart. So, I mean, I'm not all that familiar with the person that you cited, but that's my failing. I understand that, but everybody knows if you get a blurb from Donna Everhart, you've really accomplished something. So, okay. I'm serious. I'm actually serious. That's on my last book, which was whatever title that was, The Book of Carol Sue. Okay. Well, anyway, I, unlike Donna, who quit her job and went into it to writing full time, I have done more of a dual track, and I think it's worked out. I am a trained therapist, and I've continued to work, although not anymore full time. But I am still active in that field, and I think that has very much informed my work. In that, I write literary fiction that is that has a lot to do with human dynamics, family dynamics, often relationship dynamics. But I also have, with my last several books, tried to expand and in the deeper themes that I'm looking at, look at some more social issues. For example, the environment. In the one I've just finished, but is not published yet. It's just gone to my agent. Animal welfare and the environment. So that's why that's on my mind. But more mixing in a little bit more of a political mindset without beating anybody over the head or trying to start anything. And I try to be balanced about it and not have that that overtake in any way the story, but just be woven into it as something that the characters are concerned about. So let's see, what else did you want to know?
Your favorite literary guy.
Okay. I think that I was very influenced in middle school and high school by what I read, and that very much affected my desire to write. I read a lot of poetry, which my first two books were poetry, and then from then on it's been all fiction. So there's like 9 novels out now, but I remember just falling in love with Atticus Finch. I don't.
It's one of my top choices, but I'll tell you who mine is in just a second. But keep going, because that makes me very happy.
I mean, he's not. And I love the novel. I've always loved the novel. He's not the most complex character in that you don't really see a shadow side to him, you know?
But sometimes you just want that steadfastness.
Right.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And he really has that. And so for the depiction of a hero, absolutely. I mean, just.
And it doesn't hurt that he was played by Gregory Peck in the movie.
Yeah, that doesn't hurt.
Just a little bit handsome.
I was referring to the novel myself.
Oh, okay.
Of course. I am an English teacher, as many of you know, and so I have taught To Kill a Mockingbird for 7 years. I have read it a total of 10 times. I read it every year, again, with my students, chapter by chapter, as I assign it to them. And it's a book that I feel like has become such a part of my soul. I always say it's one of the most important books ever written. And about humanity and just the lessons that we learn about being human, even without the race relations or the social structure. It's just about being a good person. Be a good person. And my favorite literary character of all time is in that book. And I introduce the book to my students and I tell them that. And they say, oh, who is it? And I say, you don't get to know that until we've finished the book. And then I make them guess. My favorite literary character of all time, who happens to be a guy, so I can say it, is Boo Radley. It is absolutely Boo Radley. Also someone who does not change, someone who can rip your heart out with just one sentence, because that's all he says. And just the absolute, genuine, purest sense of love and acceptance from someone who has every reason to hate. And he is by far my favorite literary character of all time, especially since you see the results of him, the impact of him, but not him until the very end. And so I think that is absolutely some of the most stunning character construction ever done. And it is it is just beautiful. His whole story, his side of things. And when my students kind of make that transition from Boo Radley as a monster to Boo Radley is basically a guardian angel of these children, that is that moment as a teacher, an English teacher, that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. And just having that example for them, both in Atticus Finch and also in Boo Radley, as how to be a good person, no matter what your circumstances are. So I agree with you. To Kill a Mockingbird is near and dear to my heart. And I do love some Atticus Finch. And I probably was a little bit scout. It's a little tomboy, rough and tumble, always out in the woods and doing things. But gotta love me some Boo Radley. Absolutely love him. All right, so we are here to talk about, and the reason I had to choose opposite genders is because you guys all have stories where you've had to get into the mind of someone that is of the opposite gender, and all authors to a certain extent do this. But when you're dealing with some of these issues, whether it is family dynamics, whether it is that conflict or that kind of that trauma that families are going through, all of these things that you're exploring, it's a very personal trip into the mind of someone of the opposite gender in that regard, as opposed to this person needs a love interest or this person needs a best friend who's the opposite sex. This is a very intimate look at the opposite gender. And so you really are putting yourself into their soul, into their hearts, into their minds. And to be successful at it, you have to do it well. So how do you guys prepare for that kind of transition from something that may be more natural to you to write to something that might be a little bit foreign to you? We all have our stereotypes of men and women, but these stories aren't about embracing the stereotype as it is as much as getting to the heart and the soul of those characters. So how do you do that? How do you get into that headspace to do it? And this is just roundtable jump in. We're having a glass of wine. For a couple of you guys that just won't. Your Shirley Temples and work hours. So
I at least had the right glass. This is water, though.
Looks like wine. Looks like wine.
I'm sorry I gave your secret away. We could have just said
right.
Anything could be in that glass. We don't know.
Well, this is true. It could be straight up vodka.
It's moonshine, and you run out the moonshiner's daughter.
Well, I'll go ahead and go first on that question. It's a great question, and I think that pretty much any time you're creating a character, male or female, there's going to be a lot that's going to be different from you. I think that one of the things that can make a novel feel the least authentic is when suddenly you realize that all the characters have a side of the author in them, and sometimes you can tell when that happens. So I think
especially
it's really,
the author personally.
yes. So I think it's a really good exercise for me as a writer to always try to find ways that I can give my characters traits that are not only different from me, but that speak to just humanness. That will give them some personality, some character. And for whatever reason, I find writing female characters easier than writing male characters. I don't know why, but kind of once I recognize that, I just have kind of gone with it. And so I really like having a female protagonist in my novel. All three of my novels do. And for me, it's just I think any good novelist is an observer of humanity. You watch people, you observe people, you start to feel how they work and how their differences manifest in their relationships to one another. And so I think whether you're writing me as a man writing a female character, or me writing a character of a different ethnicity or different sexual orientation from myself, all of those things, or from a different historical time, the same things apply. Just being observant, also being compassionate, I think goes a long way toward getting into the mind of what this character might be feeling.
That's a good point. The observant part of that, especially, and the compassion because I think the compassion is what helps us to steer away from stereotypes. I mean, sometimes you need that archetype in your book to drive the plot. And so that stereotype needs to be there and serve a purpose. But those characters that we really connect to are the ones that we can either emotionally relate to in a positive way or emotionally want to repel. And so they're the ones we love to hate and, those kinds of things. So that compassion for understanding them as a human being. And, Tim, yours are psychological thrillers. So you're really getting into the mind of that opposite gender, as well as, that kind of close relationship part of it as well with the different characters. So as you're exploring the psychological side of each gender, how do you approach the two?
Well, I would say, first thing I would say is in answer to your previous question is, how do I sort of get ready for it? I mean, I personally kind of got ready for it by avoiding it for the first 2 books that I wrote. And I didn't think.
Interesting strategy.
Yeah, so the first book, which my first book actually wasn't published, my second book, which became Lies, both had male protagonists, had female characters, but the male, the first one was a first-person protagonist, and it was only with the one after that when it became obvious that the story was really was a story about with a female protagonist that I then kind of, decided to embrace that, and I think I found it quite difficult to begin with, but the further I got into the manuscript and into the editing after that, the more it became, it felt more natural to me to be sort of, stepping into that person's head and trying to see out through see through her eyes. And I think what Gregory was saying just now, I think was interesting about it being possibly, it encourages you. If I'm writing a male protagonist, is that the temptation's always for me is going to be, well, it's kind of a bit of me, and it's it's a bit sort of it's, whereas with the female character, I'm forced by definition to be working a little bit harder and doing a bit more of my job as a writer of sort of seeing the world through someone else's eyes rather than through someone who's kind of has a bit more in common with myself. So.
That's a good point.
I also have, the first 3 people who read my first drafts are all women. So it's my wife, my agent, my editor, and they will all have quite a lot of input. So they deserve, a lot of credit in terms of. So, for example, The Vacation, which just came out in the US, is the four main characters, all of which are women, and they all had lots of input from those 3 first readers. So but I find that I've kind of gone back and forth with each book. It seems to be, I don't know why, I've got each time I've gone back male, female. So the one I'm writing now is the one that's about to come out is female. The one I'm writing now for next year is male again. So it's kind of I'm sort of bouncing from one to the other because I think for whatever I think that the story works best with.
And that's really what it's all about, is knowing, whose perspective that story is going to be most impactful to be told from, and whether it's male or female. It does come down to the story itself and how to best deliver it. Now, as your wife is reading your books, and I guess this is a good kind of segue to all of you, do your significant others find themselves in their character? If you're keeping yourself out of your character, Tim, if it's like, I don't want my male main character to be me, does your female main character start to perhaps embody your wife a little bit, and do they start to find themselves in it?
There are bits of that, and there are obviously occasionally there are bits of people I will put in, but I find it, because I know she's going to be one of the first readers, and she will. Yeah, I would tend to try and avoid that a bit, to be honest. I find it hard enough when she's reading the first draft on her Kindle, and she's lying there or sitting there, and I'm reading it. I'm kind of looking across, like,
yeah, exactly.
She thinks it's terrible. She thinks it's terrible, and it's bad enough as it is with her kind of. And then every so often she'll stop and make a little note on her thing, and I'm like,
oh no.
So, I tend to, because she's too close, really. I think for me to put her into. A book. I mean, she knows the people that have kind of, people that have made little cameo appearances, and sometimes I'll put names of people in that we both know and stuff like that.
I do that too.
I wouldn't want to come too close to her in terms of her being in a book, because I think that would be too distracting for me, and it's too certain names I can't use. So I can't use her name as a character in a book, because I would constantly be thinking, well, yeah, that's her, isn't it? Rather than that's this person who lives in my head, sort of thing. So.
Yes, I like it. It's interesting how much we do tend to kind of pull from the people that we know. You have to kind of disguise them in ways, especially if you're using them for a villain or someone who's doesn't, get pictured in a real positive light. It's like, okay, this is a little bit of you. I just needed that one little character trait. But yeah, it's kind of fun to pull from those people, but you do have to be careful. You never know when they're going to read that. And now, Donna, you've got some male characters in your books that are not the nicest guys.
Yeah, that's for sure.
About Donna's work, there's two things Donna is brilliant at. I mean, among other things, really good men and really bad men. In my opinion, in your work. I mean,
and they're all from people that I know.
There's a list of names, descriptions, and addresses in the back.
In the back of the book, yeah.
No, but I mean, you get good, gentle men really well, and you also get nuanced, bad men really well. They also still have a touch of humanity.
Lynne has read actually the book that the fifth book that I'm waiting to hear when it will come out. It's actually been read by my agent, and now it's sitting with my editor, and he's supposed to read it sometime early February, and then I'll hear. But that was actually my first book that I had a male protagonist as well. It's two different viewpoints. So it's a male protagonist and it's a female protagonist, and they kind of swap off with the chapters. But to Nola's point and to Lynne's point, yes, I actually always think to myself when I'm creating these characters that I feel like, Dr. Frankenstein. I'm just sort of cobbling bits and pieces of people that I know. If I need a bad sort of character trait or something bad to happen, then hey, the walk of life, right? We've all run into some of those shady characters before. But yes, it's like, I think it was Tim, or I can't remember now who said it, that they find writing the opposite character easier. Or was that Gregory? I can't remember which one. Gregory, okay. I actually think it's kind of easy to write the guys. Now, I could sort of jump into that old cliche that we've all heard about how men speak only 7,000 words a day and women say 20,000, so I don't have to worry too much about dialogue.
Just a few grunts, yeah.
Shoulder, but seriously, I have found it, it's not too difficult for me to write the male characters. And I don't know if that has something to do, Nola, with the fact that, like you, I was a big tomboy growing up, and, or just that I actually kind of like to hang out around, boys at school, and not for any other reason than I just liked what they were doing better than what I liked all that the little girls were doing. I would rather be climbing the trees and playing ball than sitting in a room playing with dolls, which I did that too. But, I found it more exciting to do the other stuff. But the bottom line is, I have created some villains, and they were a lot of fun.
Villains are my favorite to write. I love
writing.
I love it. So, AC, tell me about your process and how you do this, how you approach the gender roles.
Well, I was really blessed in my upbringing. My father died when I was quite young, and essentially what happened to me was that my grandmother essentially became my mother. She was an old Victorian woman, a real product of her time. My mother was a real maverick. She actually built the house that we lived in by herself, including the walls, the wiring, the chimney, all that sort of stuff. and pictures of her from the 30s. She's wearing pants, which of course no women did at that point. And my younger sister is a very adventurous, talented artist. So I had that to sort of to work with. So one of the things that I think a lot about when writing female characters, and I tend to love to write them, and I have a number of them in various ways, I think about what time period are they in? And what are the constraints of that time period? Because it not only shapes their actions, it shapes their view of themselves. And so I try to get a little bit inside of that. I also was very fortunate in having an extremely dear friend who I knew when she was in her late 80s and early 90s, and she was quite something. She hung around with Andy Warhol. She traveled around the world. She did all of these sort of things, and she was a fascinating character in that she was very, very ahead of her day in some ways, but she was very much influenced when it came to men by her generation. So you'd hear of her smuggling pictures of the Dalai Lama into Tibet, but if you went out to dinner with her, she'd use the Jackie Kennedy voice and lean forward to show her 80-year-old cleavage. It was very a paradox. But she said something to me that really, really helped me tremendously. What she said was, women are like water. Water flows, and water comes up against obstacles. But when they come up against an obstacle, they find another way to go around it. And just always remember, the same molecules that are in the small babbling brook are in the raging river. So I've always thought of women as having to go the extra mile, having to figure out how to get by, whether it's prejudices or obstacles or biases, and communicating in a much broader way with a degree of fellowship and subtlety that I don't necessarily, the men in my life, I've not necessarily seen that way. So I really challenge myself, especially on the second edit when the book is sort of written. I go back and say, is this going beyond what I might necessarily do as a man? And very quickly, it also really came to the fore for me because one of my characters in the Homeport Journals is a gender fluid housekeeper who channels Mrs. Danvers and Norma Desmond. And so this is a man pretending to be, or not pretending, but acting as a woman, but really isn't a woman. He's a man's view of a woman. So I've really loved just kind of grappling with that. And I honestly have to say, I don't think other than the three influences I mentioned, my grandmother, my mother, and my sister, I'm not sure that I'd be able to do it.
Well, AC, I don't think anybody does. I haven't read anybody that does the kind of elderly, smart, sarcastic dowager better than you do. Like when you open the Homeport Journals with Dory, and then you go right to Lola.
Yeah.
I mean, and they're funny, but they sound very authentic. I mean, they just sound like eccentric. Just they're rounded characters.
Oh well, thank you so much. I was channeling a little bit of my grandmother.
I was wondering if that's what you were getting at.
And for Dory, a neighbor here in Provincetown, a Portuguese neighbor who was just incredibly feisty and just did not care what anyone thought. So
yeah, exactly.
Thank you for that, Lynne. I appreciate it.
Dory does not care what anybody thinks.
Not at all.
That's not like women I want to hang out with, frankly. Yeah. I mean, it's like, I don't want to hang out with these ladies. That sounds like fun. You're going to have a few drinks. You're going to tell some stories. It's going to get good.
Oh, you'd have to. You'd have to have a few drinks.
They just cut right to, like, there's no BS with them.
Right. Love that. That's the old lady I want to be, like Sophia on the Golden Girls.
Exactly.
Except I'm gonna have to pretend to have a stroke if I don't have one, so that I can turn my filter completely off, like she did, because that is really who I want to be. Is just I want to get to that age where I can just tell people, because this, the Southerner in me
That's
And,
what
you know,
right.
Oh yeah, sure, sure.
y'all know the
God bless
Southerners.
their heart.
Bless your heart, you know,
Yeah.
and then we say something that is very veiled and insulting, as opposed to just coming out and saying whatever it is that we want. Now, that has to wait until we're much, much older. So those are the days that I'm waiting for. And I've got a few people I want to have a conversation with when I get to that age. Just talk about lists. Starting one on my own over here.
I noticed an interesting question in the chat
Yeah, the one about switching perspectives.
Yeah. So
yeah, this is a great one, and I do want to get to this one as well. So Catherine's question, it's kind of small, so hopefully you guys on a phone can read it. I know sometimes I can't. Have you ever begun writing from one perspective, then decided the book really needed to be from a different character's perspective? So if you started in one gender and then flipped it because it would be better being told from someone else's point of view? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, and that is actually exactly how my second novel, The Exile, kind of came into being. I didn't actually really start writing the book too far, but I had written a basic synopsis and was about to start it. So this was all kind of in the first day of mapping out this new novel. And I realized that the three primary characters of the novel, each of their roles could fall into some very stereotypical roles for male and female characters. And so I switched the genders of all three characters. And it suddenly, for me, it made it so that I was so excited to write the novel because it immediately gave them depth without even having started writing it. And I think that was, looking back now, it's almost impossible for me to imagine it as I originally wrote out that early synopsis, but I think it was a stroke that kind of then made the novel into what it was.
That's very interesting kind of magic moment where when that kind of thing happens, you're like, that's it. That's what I need to do. Now, Lynne, you changed kind of focus. I mean, as you got from your first book to the Book of Carol Sue, that you've got, you stayed kind of with the women and it's the men in their lives, you know, all of these things that are going on with them. You kind of shifted focus a little bit, and as opposed to kind of keeping the same main characters going through the whole thing, you know, it's the same characters but a different kind of look at one of them. How do you choose who you're going to focus on? How do you pick the character that is going to be the story that stands out? I mean, I know we met Carol Sue in the first book, and so we kind of get to know her, but how did you decide to kind of take off with that?
Well, these are my two most recent novels, The Testament of Harold's Wife and The Book of Carol Sue. And Carol Sue is not really a sequel. It will stand alone.
Right.
But in The Testament of Harold's Wife, it's almost entirely, as a matter of fact, I think it might be, I think it is entirely in Louisa's point of view. It's all first person. In The Book of Carol Sue, I have a number of male characters and write from their point of view. They're family members and people that are involved with her. But I wasn't done with those characters. I just loved the setting, and I loved what was happening, and I felt like there was more to do with them, but I didn't want to do a series. So it's a standalone follow-up. But I also really wanted the men, their roles to be explained in their own point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think that added.
I like that. I like using that point of view, looking at, you know, they're all kind of focused in on that one person, but they're all seeing her kind of through their own perspective, their own lens, which is definitely.
I have never written a novel from an entirely male perspective. When I've written from a male perspective, it's always been as a point of view chapter or section, and then a woman, and then, you know, somebody else perhaps. But now I'm finding that when I write, I'm not doing a single point of view anymore. It doesn't feel like enough to do only one point of view. Now, maybe that'll change again. I don't know, because my first couple of books were all one point of view. We'll see. You never know how it's going to evolve.
Speaking of family dynamics, we're going to talk about a family that has chosen to stay together for hundreds of years as we get into our New Orleans history and mystery. So I know Gregory's got to go. He's still working. So we're going to let him get to a meeting here in a little bit. So we're going to move on to our ghost story here that we like to tell. So our family dynamics story starts at the beautiful Oak Alley Plantation. And so we're going to talk about sugarcane, ghosts, and vampires at the Oak Alley Plantation. This classical revival structure stands at one end of twin rows of oaks that were planted in the early 1700s, and all of them still stand today. And the home that is behind that row of oaks was built in 1836, and it was built by Jacques and Selina Roman. And it replaced a very small cottage. So, of course, that small cottage, this house behind it is huge. So that cottage would have looked strangely dwarfed had they left it there. It is 2 rows of 14 oaks that are planted 800 feet apart and span 800 feet from the River Road levee, from the River Road and the levee of the Mississippi River all the way to the manor house. And so these are live oaks, and they will stand for well past our lives, I'm sure. Now, Selina is one of the ghosts that haunts the grounds of the Oak Alley Plantation. Of course, it was Jacques, Selina, and their daughter Louisa, who haunt this house. So even though she preferred city life, she loved the action of the city of New Orleans. She had a great life at Oak Alley as well, and she was a dedicated and loving wife to Jacques. Jacques, over 10 years, got increasingly sick, and then he died, and it crushed her and it crushed their daughter. She loved him very much. This was not one of those arranged marriages that are just there for continuing wealth and all of those things. She loved him, and she can be seen wandering the property, dressed in full mourning blacks, antebellum mourning blacks. And she is so lifelike that many of the tourists and folks on the tour actually think that she's a tour guide dressed in period clothes, right up until the point where she vanishes. And then there is dear Jacques himself. And I've actually stood right there where that balcony is and looked out at those oaks. It is a spectacular view. Jacques is also seen in broad daylight. So these ghosts don't hide in the shadows and in the night. They just love where they are, and they walk around their plantation. So Jacques adored this house, and he adored the plantation and enjoyed his life there very, very much. And he continues to wander and maintain the property, it seems. And sometimes visitors, when they pause to look out of the first floor windows, will find him looking right back at them. And then, of course, he vanishes. Now, dear Louise was the daughter of Jacques and Selina. She lost her leg as a child in an accident while she was dashing up these very stairs right here. And because of this accident, she lost her leg and lived most of her life as a recluse in the house, just staying relatively hidden. This was not something, that type of handicap was not uncommon, but it was also not as readily acceptable. And so she was a recluse. Many years later, however, she died. And when she died, she was buried with the leg that she lost as a child. And so she was actually seen walking around completely intact as her spirit form all around the property, but she is walking sadly about the house as though she is mourning the loss of her father and the loss of the life that she had at Oak Alley. And again, looking very lifelike to the point where folks think that she is just one of the tour guides. And the ghosts themselves are not the only way that people know that there are visitors about, and supernatural visitors. Some visitors that stay in the bed and breakfast part of the house will report hearing carriages arriving, particularly at night, coming up that gravel circle in the back of the house. The front of the house faces the river. The back side of the house is a big circular drive, and the stone circular drive. And so they will hear carriages arriving, complete with the sounds of chains rattling on the carriage, straining leather of the harnesses, and horses neighing. In the sick room and the nursery, some will feel their foreheads and arms grow very hot as though they are feverish. Many smell tobacco and roses when there are none present. And then on the second floor gallery, a vacant rocking chair will rock. And being at the Myrtles Plantation in St. Francisville, when I was in theater, we were reenacting some of the ghost stories. That rocking chair is actually a fairly common spirit manifestation. I actually saw a rocking chair at the Myrtles rocking. There were 3 on the back porch. The one in the middle was slowly rocking as though someone was sitting in it, just kind of whiling away the hours looking at the property. And I mentioned vampires. So here is why. These are vampires we know. These are the folks of Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. The movie was filmed in South Louisiana. The home of Louis, our vampire, played by Brad Pitt, was indeed Oak Alley Plantation. So at the very beginning, we see Louis riding along the levee on the River Road, and he comes up the magnificent Twin Alley, the Twin Oaks there, and he rides up the house. Now, the slaves burn the house down. That is one of the things when they realize that, you know, they're vampires and the slaves revolt. Louis burns the house down. The whole thing goes up in flames. Of course, they really didn't burn down Oak Alley, but that is that famous scene there as well. However, the interior shots of Interview with a Vampire were not done at Oak Alley Plantation. As stunning as it is, those shots were actually done at Destrehan Plantation downriver. And one of the rooms in Destrehan Plantation actually is still painted green from the green that was used as the dining room in Interview with a Vampire. Huh. And 2 of the chandeliers that were used in the movie still hang in Destrehan Plantation as gifts from the production to the house as a thank you. These antique chandeliers hang in Destrehan Plantation. So Hollywood is no stranger to the plantations and Oak Alley. If you were watching Interview with a Vampire, now you will know a little bit about that historic home, and it's not just the vampires that haunt those halls. So that is our Interview with the Vampire in Oak Alley, kind of history lesson there. Real quick question for you guys. Lanyap question. Would you rather, because Groundhog's Day is coming up, would you rather have 6 more weeks of winter or an early spring? Are you a winter person, a cold weather person, or a warm weather person?
Warm. Spring.
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 It's 75 and I'm freezing.
It was snowing today in Tennessee, and I'm going, no. So I was watching all that.
It's going to be 16 tomorrow. So
you can keep that.
I know. I don't want to. You can have it.
The South Louisiana girl does not like a Tennessee winter, so I'm going to put in my order with Punxsutawney Phil and ask him for an early spring myself. I don't care for cold weather one bit. So we are unanimous in that, our need for an early spring. So as we wrap up and let you guys know, since I get to talk books with everybody else, we're going to talk mine for just a second. So Crescent City Moon and the sequel, Crescent City Sin, are my books. They take place in 1830 New Orleans. And so grab a copy of those. They're a little creepy, a little fun. And Book Riot called it a tour book of New Orleans, but with murder. So that works for me. That's about right.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Lots of voodoo. Trying to keep the magic and the voodoo authentic as possible. And yes, because it is a real place that is near and dear to my heart, even the setting is as authentic as it can be. Those of you who are of the single types, we are putting together, me and Annie Mcdaniel, who helps produce the show. And of course, I help her out over there at The Right Review. We're putting together something fun for February, the Book of Love dating game. We don't know who wrote the Book of Love, but we're going to play the game. And we are looking for single authors and audiobook narrators for 2 fun book-themed dating game shows. So we're looking for some guys and gals who want to join us and answer dating game style questions, but with a literary bent. So if you are interested in that, get in contact with Annie Mcdaniel over at The Right Review, and she will put you on our list of volunteers. And we will get you ready for that show. And so we have gotten, I did not have Gregory's cover because it's launching hopefully tomorrow. Remember, we put that in the chat where you can find his Facebook to see that. So we've got some of our covers from our great authors over here, we always want to see the beautiful covers. And so lots and lots of gorgeous books here. Please check out our authors and their books and these fantastic stories that they have told from both perspectives, male and female. And if you didn't get a chance to catch the show from the beginning, or if you didn't get a chance to watch past shows that you would like to see, you can always catch us on Nola Nash Entertainment on YouTube. That's my YouTube channel where all of the Second Line shows. They are live on YouTube there as well, but you can always post comments and see all the way back to the very first Second Line show we did. They're there at Nola Nash Entertainment. Hopefully we have grown some and improved some since some of the first shows that were actually done just kind of as a wild hair, just something to do over the quarantine. Annie and I had a wild hair one morning and it turned into the Second Line show. And so here we are, folks. So we're getting better and better as we go along. But we always have us a good time. And speaking of a good time, thank you so much to all of you for joining us today on the Second Line show. It has been truly a treat to have each and every one of you here.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
you are
thank you,
most
Noah.
welcome. And thank you, Tim, for staying up so late.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we appreciate you guys very, very much. And tune in next time, y'all.
Thank you.